My name is Margaret, and I spent 10 years in a marriage that turned out to be a carefully constructed trap. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the life you built, the vows you trusted, and the family you thought was yours, all of it was a lie. That's what happened to me. The man I loved, the man I stood beside through struggles and triumphs, never truly left his ex-wife. Their divorce papers, the ones he had shown me so confidently, were nothing but staged documents. And the child I had poured my heart into raising, that little boy, wasn't mine at all. He belonged to her. But let me take you back to the beginning, before the lies unraveled, before I understood that the ground beneath me had always been quicksand. Because every trap looks harmless at first. Every cage looks inviting until the door clicks shut. When I first met Robert, I was 35 and working as a nurse in a small-town clinic in Indiana. I had been divorced for several years, raising my daughter Emily on my own. Robert came into the clinic one day with a sprained wrist, all charm and smiles, making jokes, even as I wrapped his hand in gauze. He had that kind of presence, a man who seemed steady, dependable, a man who looked at me like I was the answer to his prayers. For women my age, especially those who had been burned by love before, there's a hunger to be seen again, to be valued. Robert had a way of filling that emptiness. He said all the right things, that he admired my strength, that he wanted a real family, that he respected how hard I worked. Before long, he was bringing me coffee before my shifts, fixing the broken steps on my porch, making Emily laugh with silly faces and knock-knock jokes. He didn't rush me, didn't pressure me. He made it seem like we were building something steady, brick by brick. The truth is, I wanted to believe. Maybe I even needed to. At 35, with bills piling up and loneliness gnawing at me every night after Emily went to bed, I wanted the fairy tale. And Robert was ready to play the part of Prince Charming. When he told me about his past, he painted himself as a survivor. He said he had gone through a bitter divorce, that his ex-wife was manipulative and cruel. He showed me papers, divorce decrees, custody agreements, though I never looked too closely. Why would I? I trusted him. He told me he wanted a fresh start, that I was his chance to build a better life. And I believed him. Our wedding wasn't grand, but it felt beautiful to me. A small church ceremony, Emily as my flower girl, Robert's cousin as his best man. Friends from work came, neighbors brought casseroles, and for the first time in years, I felt secure. I thought I had finally won at life, that love had finally chosen me after years of disappointment. The first year of our marriage was almost perfect. Robert was attentive, always planning little outings, taking Emily fishing, fixing things around the house. He called me. His rock said he didn't know how he'd managed without me. When I got sick with the flu, he stayed up all night bringing me soup and cold compresses. When Emily had trouble in school, he volunteered to help with her homework. But even in those early days, there were shadows I ignored. He would disappear for hours with vague excuses about helping a friend or working late. He always kept his phone close, even sleeping with it under his pillow. If I asked too many questions, he would kiss my forehead and say, "Don't worry so much, Maggie. I'd never hurt you." The cracks were small, then easy to plaster over with affection and excuses. I told myself every marriage had mysteries, every husband had his secrets. And besides, hadn't I been blessed? A man who loved me, who provided, who said we were a team. It wasn't until the second year, when he brought home a baby, that my world began to tilt in ways I couldn't yet understand. He told me it was our miracle, that after all the grief I had suffered with miscarriages, fate had finally given us a child. I remember holding that baby boy in my arms, tears streaming down my face, thinking my prayers had been answered. I didn't know then that the boy wasn't mine. I didn't know that I was already caught in a web spun so tightly around me that escape would take a decade. Looking back now, I see the warning signs I missed. The sudden windfalls of money that didn't add up with his job. The way he flinched when certain names came up. The calls he took in the driveway speaking in low tones. But when you're in love, when you want to believe, you rewrite the story in your head. You make excuses for the man you've given your heart to. And that's how the trap works. Not all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, until you don't even notice the door has closed. I believed his lies. I believed in him. And that belief cost me 10 years of my life. I believed his lies, every single one of them, because he wrapped them in tenderness and familiarity. Lies are easier to swallow when they come from the lips of someone who strokes your hair at night and whispers that you're their whole world. Looking back, I wonder if he ever told me the truth about anything at all. The lies began small, almost invisible, like hairline cracks in glass. He'd tell me he was working overtime, but his paycheck never reflected the hours. He claimed he had no contact with his ex-wife, yet I'd catch glimpses of a woman's handwriting on notes stuffed in his pockets. He dismissed them as old things he'd forgotten to throw away. I wanted to trust him, so I let it go. The biggest lie, though, was the story he told me about himself, about who he was. Robert painted himself as a man wronged by fate, abandoned by a cold and selfish woman who'd left him to pick up the pieces. He showed me fake divorce papers and custody agreements as proof that he was free. I remember how my heart softened when he told me with a tremble in his voice that all he wanted was a woman who would love him honestly, without games. He made me feel chosen, like I was the lucky one who had rescued him from despair. People sometimes ask, "Didn't you see the red flags?" And the truth is I did. I just chose to look away. Love does that to you. It clouds your vision. It makes you rewrite reality in softer shades. When he disappeared late at night, I told myself he was helping a friend. When he guarded his phone like it was gold, I told myself men need their privacy too. And when his stories didn't quite add up, I told myself he was tired, stressed, and deserved the benefit of the doubt. Emily, my daughter from my first marriage, adored him. That sealed my faith in him even further. She would run into his arms when he got home, shouting "Daddy" with pure joy. He would lift her high into the air, spinning her around until she squealed with laughter. Watching them together, I convinced myself I had finally given her the father she deserved. What kind of mother would I be to take that away from her by questioning him? But trust built on lies is like building a house on sand. It feels sturdy until the storm comes, and then it all collapses. One night, about 3 years into our marriage, Robert told me he had something to share. His eyes were shining with excitement like a man with good news. He said, "Maggie, we're going to have another child in this family." My heart leapt. After years of heartbreak miscarriages that had hollowed me out, I thought maybe, just maybe, a miracle had happened. But then he explained. He said his cousin had died in an accident, leaving behind a baby boy with no one to care for him. He said we had a chance to take the child in to raise him as our own. I remember how he looked at me as he spoke earnest, pleading, like he was offering me salvation. And in my vulnerable heart, I saw it that way too. When he brought the baby into our home wrapped in a soft blue blanket, I held him against my chest and whispered, "Welcome home." That night, I cried tears of joy. I thought God had finally heard me. I thought Robert was giving me back the future I'd lost. I didn't know that even then I was living inside one of his biggest lies. That baby wasn't an orphan. He wasn't Robert's cousin's child. He was the son of Robert and his so-called ex-wife. The truth was hidden from me, buried under layer upon layer of deception. But a lie, no matter how carefully crafted, always leaves a trail. It might take months, years even, but eventually cracks appear. There were nights when the baby would wake up crying, and Robert seemed to know exactly how to soothe him, like he'd done it before. There were visits Robert insisted on making, alone claiming he was meeting with a lawyer about the adoption. And there were moments when he looked at the boy with such deep familiarity that it stirred something uneasy inside me. Still, I believed his story. I believed the paperwork he showed me, the reassurances he whispered, the promises he made. I believed because I wanted to, because the alternative, the possibility that my marriage was built on lies, was too terrifying to face. Belief can be a dangerous thing. It can be a prison all its own, stronger than any locked door or barred window. I was trapped, not because Robert held me there, but because I held myself in place, clinging to the lies he fed me. And every day the walls of that prison grew higher. He never left his ex. That's the part that still makes my stomach churn even now, when the dust has long settled. While I was setting the table for dinner, folding laundry, or rocking a child to sleep, he was slipping back into a life I thought no longer existed. He played husband to 2 women at once, and I, blind, hopeful, desperate for love, played my role without realizing I wasn't the only one in the play. At first it was the phone calls. He would step outside late at night, speaking in a low voice, pacing the driveway. When I asked who it was, he'd say, "Work emergency." Then it became an old friend going through a tough time. I wanted to believe him, so I did. That's what love had done to me. It trained me to explain away the obvious. Then came the weekends. Robert suddenly had business trips that took him out of town. He said he was meeting clients or attending conferences. I'd pack him lunches for the road, kiss him goodbye at the door, and wait for his return. When he came back, he always brought little souvenirs, a keychain, a scarf, a jar of homemade jam he claimed he bought from a roadside stand. Looking back, I see those trinkets for what they were, props in a performance. One night, he forgot the performance. He came home late, smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't wear. I asked where he'd been. He kissed my forehead, smiled, and said, "Long night. Let's not fight, okay?" And just like that, I swallowed my suspicion. The truth hit me years later like a car out of nowhere. It wasn't whispered, it wasn't stumbled upon, it was delivered straight to my face. I was at the grocery store pushing a cart full of milk and bread when I heard someone call his name. I turned, and there she was, Linda. The ex-wife I believed was long gone. She looked at me with a smirk that froze my blood. "So you're the new one," she said, crossing her arms. I stammered, "Excuse me." She tilted her head, pity in her eyes. "He told you we're divorced, didn't he?" Her laugh was sharp as glass. "Honey, he never left me. We've been together this whole time." The fluorescent lights above seemed to buzz louder. My hands tightened on the cart handle as my world cracked open. "You're lying," I whispered, though my voice shook with doubt. Linda leaned closer, her words dripping with cruelty. "Check the records. Go on. You'll see the divorce was never finalized. He just needed someone to raise the kid while I took a break." Her words lodged into my chest like shards. I left the cart in the aisle and stumbled out of the store, the ground tilting beneath me. That night I confronted Robert. I told him what Linda had said, expecting denial, excuses, anything. But he didn't bother with lies this time. He just sighed, sat down at the kitchen table, and looked me in the eye. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," he said. That was it. No apology, no explanation, Just a cold admission, like I was finally being let in on the joke everyone else already knew. The betrayal sank in slow, like poison spreading through my veins. Every smile, every promise, every tender moment, it all twisted in my memory, tainted with deceit. I realized then that I had never truly been a wife in his eyes. I was a stand-in, a caretaker, a placeholder in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. He had never left his ex because he never intended to. He had strung me along with lies to keep me where he wanted me, useful, loyal, blind. I went to bed that night, beside a man I no longer knew, staring at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of his breath. And I made myself a promise one day this would all come to light. He thought he had me trapped, but he had underestimated one thing. A woman betrayed is not a woman defeated. Their divorce was fake. That sentence alone sounds like the plot of some cheap soap opera, but it was my life, my humiliating, gut-wrenching reality. After Linda's taunting at the grocery store, I couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in my ears, buzzing like angry bees. Check the records, she had said. So I did. I drove myself down to the county courthouse on a gray Monday morning. The clerk behind the glass window hardly looked up as I slid a slip of paper with Robert's full name and Linda's across the counter. My heart hammered in my chest as I waited. She typed into her computer, scrolled, then left to fetch a file. When she came back, she handed me a thin manila folder. I stepped outside before opening it. My hands shook as I flipped through the documents. The petition for divorce was there filed years ago, but stamped across the front in bold red ink were the words, "Case dismissed. Petition withdrawn." I stopped breathing. My vision blurred. All this time I had believed I was his wife. I had worn the ring, taken his name, cooked his meals, and built a life around him. But legally, in the eyes of the state, I was nothing. A mistress. A fool. The shame burned hotter than the betrayal. I thought about all the church gatherings we'd attended, all the neighbors who waved at us in the yard, all the family photos I'd mailed out at Christmas. Did everyone know was I the only one who didn't see? That night when Robert came home, I laid the folder on the kitchen table. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling with fury. He glanced at the papers, shrugged, and said, "It's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like," I snapped. "It looks like you never divorced her. It looks like I've been living in a sham marriage for years." He rubbed his temples as if I were the one causing him a headache. "Linda and I had complications. It wasn't the right time to finalize things. But you and I, what we have, it's real. Real." That word made me want to scream. How could he say it was real when everything was built on a lie? I demanded answers, but all he gave me were vague excuses. "It's complicated. You wouldn't understand. I was trying to protect you." Protect me? No, he was protecting himself. His secret life, his twisted little arrangement with Linda. I locked myself in the bathroom that night and cried until my throat ached. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was unrecognizable. Hollow eyes, blotchy skin, a mouth twisted with grief. I pressed my hand against my chest and whispered, "Who am I if not his wife?" The answer was as devastating as it was simple. I was nobody to him. Days turned into weeks, and I moved through the house like a ghost. I cooked meals I couldn't eat, folded laundry I didn't care about, smiled mechanically at the child who clung to me, unaware of the storm swirling around us. But inside, something was shifting. Anger began to harden inside me, cooling into resolve. I started making copies of the court documents, of bank statements, of anything I could get my hands on. I visited a lawyer in secret, sitting in her quiet office, while she explained my lack of legal standing. "You're not his wife," Legally speaking, she said gently, you have no rights to property, no claim to spousal support. The humiliation cut deep, but it also sparked a flame. I may not have been his wife on paper, but I was not powerless. Not anymore. Robert underestimated me. He thought I would crumble under the weight of the truth, retreat into silence like a scolded child. But he didn't understand that a woman stripped of her illusions is a woman set free. One evening, as he sat across from me eating dinner like nothing had changed, I looked at him differently. Not as a husband, not even as a man I once loved. I looked at him as an opponent, someone who had played me for years and believed he'd gotten away with it. He was wrong, because I had finally seen the truth, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. His divorce was fake. Our marriage was fake. But my resolve, that was real, and it was growing stronger every day. I raised another woman's child. For years, I rocked him to sleep, kissed scraped knees, and sat in crowded school auditoriums cheering his name. I braided his hair for picture day, packed lunches with handwritten notes, and whispered bedtime prayers at night. I poured my heart into that boy because I thought he was mine, or at least ours. But the truth was far crueler. He was the child of my husband and the woman he never left. Robert had brought him home one rainy evening, wrapped in a blue blanket, saying he was family. He told me his cousin had died in a car accident, leaving the baby with no one to care for him. His eyes had shone with sincerity, his voice trembling as he said, "We can give him a home, Maggie. We can give him love." And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. After all the heartbreak of miscarriages, after all the nights crying into my pillow for the child I'd never have here, was an innocent life being handed to me. I took that baby in my arms and whispered, "You're safe now. You're mine." From that day on, I was his mother in every way that mattered, or so I thought. I changed diapers, woke for midnight feedings, and stayed home while Robert worked. When he said he'd handle the adoption paperwork, I didn't question him. I trusted. I trusted the man who had already betrayed me 100 times over, because trust was the only thing holding my fragile world together. But children have a way of carrying secrets in their very blood. As the boy grew, people began to comment on how much he looked like Robert. "He's the spitting image of his daddy," neighbors would say with a smile. I'd force a laugh, hiding the unease twisting in my stomach. The resemblance was undeniable. His dark eyes, his crooked grin, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. Sometimes when Robert thought I wasn't looking, he'd gaze at the boy with a tenderness that felt different, deeper, familiar in a way I couldn't explain. And once, when Linda crossed paths with us at a school event, she looked at the boy with tears shining in her eyes. She didn't approach, but her stare lingered long enough to make my heart pound with questions I didn't dare ask. The truth slammed into me one night when I overheard a hushed argument between Robert and Linda on the phone. I had picked up the extension in the bedroom, intending to call Emily to the table, but instead I heard Linda's voice, sharp and accusing. "He needs to know who his real mother is, Robert. We can't keep lying forever." My blood froze. My fingers went numb around the receiver. Robert hissed back, "Not yet. She'll leave if she finds out. Do you want to ruin everything?" That was it. The curtain ripped open. The boy I had kissed, rocked, and claimed as mine was never mine at all. He was the child of their twisted ongoing union, planted in my arms as a cruel replacement for the child I had lost. I sank to the floor phone, still pressed to my ear, the room spinning around me. Every memory of raising him replayed in my mind, each one twisting into a knife. His first word, his first steps, the night he called me Mommy. For the first time, it was all tainted. I had been nothing more than a caretaker for another woman's son. But here's the thing, love doesn't vanish with truth. My heart didn't suddenly stop beating for that boy. If anything, the truth made my love fiercer. Because I wasn't just his substitute mother. I was the one who had been there day in and day out, when neither of his so-called parents bothered to show up. I realized something then. They might have given him life, but I had given him a childhood. I had given him safety, stability, and love. And no matter what the blood said, no one could take that away from me. The betrayal was unbearable, yes, but so was the thought of abandoning him. So I kept the secret, burying it deep inside me, because he deserved a mother, even if I was never meant to be his. Yet the knowledge simmered like acid in my veins. Every time I looked at Robert, every time I passed Linda in town, every time the boy smiled up at me with Robert's eyes, I was reminded of the lie I was living. I had raised another woman's child, and in doing so, I had unknowingly carried the weight of their deceit on my back. But I also carried something else strength, because raising him taught me that I was more than their pawn. I was a mother in the truest sense, not by blood, but by choice, by love, and by sacrifice. And that, perhaps, was the one thing they could never take from me. Signs made me doubt. Doubt is a funny thing. It sneaks in quietly, whispers instead of shouts. For years, I silenced those whispers, told myself I was imagining things, that suspicion was poison to a marriage. But once doubt takes root, it grows, twisting its way through everything, cracking the foundation beneath your feet. The first sign came in the form of a receipt. I found it while tidying up the laundry room tucked into the pocket of Robert's jeans, a gold necklace purchased from a jewelry store downtown. My heart fluttered. For a moment, maybe it was for me. But when I opened my jewelry box later that night, there was nothing new. "Who's the necklace for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Robert barely looked up from his plate. "Client gift. You know how it is." He said it with such confidence that I felt foolish for even asking, but something inside me ached. Since when did construction managers buy gold necklaces for clients? Another sign came when I stumbled across a photograph tucked in the back of his desk drawer. It was old edges, worn, but recent enough to sting. Robert and Linda, their heads pressed close together, smiling like no time had passed. On the back, in Linda's handwriting, were the words, "Forever, no matter what, matter." I confronted him, trembling with anger. He laughed, brushed it off as an old picture he forgot to throw away. He kissed my cheek, called me paranoid, and went on with his evening like my world hadn't just cracked open. Paranoid. That word became his shield, his weapon. Anytime I questioned him, he'd wield it against me until I began to wonder if I really was losing my mind. But the signs kept coming. Phone calls cut short when I walked into the room. Business trips that always seemed to land near Linda's hometown. And once a slip of the tongue, he called me by her name. He froze when he said it, then quickly covered with a laugh, claiming he was half asleep. I forced a smile, but inside my stomach twisted. The boy, too, gave me reason to doubt. As he grew older, he asked questions that made my blood run cold. Why does Miss Linda hug me so tight? Why does she cry when she sees me? Once after a school event, he whispered in my ear, "She told me she's my mommy. Is that true?" I held him close, heart pounding, and said, "I'm your mommy. Don't you ever doubt that." But inside, the ground was slipping away from me. It was Emily, my daughter, who finally voiced what I was too afraid to admit. She was a teenager by then, sharp-eyed and perceptive. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her expression grave. "Mom," she said quietly, "he's lying to you. I see it. You deserve better." Her words cut deep because they echoed my own secret thoughts. For years, I had swallowed my doubts to keep the peace, to keep the illusion of family intact. But my daughter, my own flesh and blood, saw through it, and she wasn't willing to pretend anymore. The doubts that had once been whispers now screamed in my ears. Every time Robert left the house, I wondered where he truly went. Every time his phone buzzed, I wondered who was on the other end. Every time he touched me, I wondered if he touched her the same way hours before. I began keeping a notebook, jotting down dates, times, inconsistencies. I wasn't even sure why, maybe to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy. Maybe because deep down, I knew I would need the truth written in black and white someday. And then came the night that shattered any lingering denial. Robert had fallen asleep on the couch, his phone slipping from his hand. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. The screen lit up with a message preview, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Love you." Not love, Mom, not love, sis, just love you. My chest tightened as I opened the thread. Dozens of messages scrolled before my eyes. Plans, affection, pet names. Linda's name glowing at the top of the screen. My hands shook as I set the phone down. There it was, proof. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. The signs had been there all along, and I had ignored them. That night, lying awake with my daughter's words echoing in my mind, I made a decision. Doubt was no longer my prison. Doubt was my fuel. If he thought I was blind, he was wrong. I would see everything. I would gather it piece by piece until the whole rotten truth stood naked in the light. They thought they could bury the truth forever. They were wrong. Once I stopped being afraid, everything I had already suspected snapped into place like a rope pulled tight. I began with what I knew how to do best: collect, organize, and document. Paper trails don't lie. People do. I spent nights hunched over our kitchen table lamp on the boy asleep down the hall, stacking bank statements, photocopying checks, and matching dates. I had never been the type to understand business ledgers, but I understood enough to see patterns, withdrawals that couldn't be explained, loans opened in my name that I'd never signed for payments to addresses I'd never heard of. The more I found, the less mysterious things became. Small sums siphoned off here and there, home improvement checks that paid people whose names didn't match the receipts. I learned the language of fraud from pamphlets at the county clerk's office and late-night phone calls with a retired accountant who lived 2 streets over and had once been helpful to my husband before he wasn't. People started sliding me envelopes at church, a neighbor who kept her eyes down, but said, "You didn't deserve that," then handed me a notarized statement she'd been holding for months. It turned out the plot was more than a series of selfish choices. It was an elaborate, cruel plan. Robert and Linda had courted the small-town sympathy that lets men get away with being complicated. They'd created a false narrative, troubled past penitent man, new beginning, so that when a woman like me came along ready to love and heal, they could make use of her. The child, the home, the community, respect, all tools to keep me anchored while money moved out from under my feet. I hired a lawyer. Saying those words aloud felt like admitting defeat at first, but it didn't. It felt like arming myself. The lawyer sat across from me and, with no judgment, explained the path I could take: file for fraud, present the forged documents, put the financial records under scrutiny. She warned it wouldn't be easy, not in a town where reputations matter more than evidence. But she also said, one sentence I will never forget: "You have what they don't, time spent here." witnesses who can speak to your role, and a community that once it knows can act. The case became less about me and more about righting a wrong. When I filed the complaint, word spread. Some people turned away uncomfortable with the scandal, but others, unexpected faces from my life, came forward. The man who ran the hardware store remembered odd jobs Robert claimed to be doing. The Sunday school teacher found an enrollment form with Linda's name typed where mine should have been. Mrs. Jenkins, who had once whispered a warning and then clammed up, testified that she'd seen them together more than once. Slowly into the courtroom, the town's collective memory poured evidence. Court was its own kind of crucible. Sitting in that wooden chair, I felt every pair of eyes. I spoke plainly about the receipts, the forged paperwork, the boy I'd raised. I told the judge about late nights with the child, the bake sales, the school plays. I didn't present myself as a perfect victim. I presented myself as someone who had lived a truth that had been stolen. The lawyer for Robert and Linda tried to trim the edges to paint me as gullible, but facts are stubborn things. Forensic accountants unraveled bank transfers. A retired clerk confirmed the divorce petition had been filed but never processed. A handwriting analyst testified about signatures that didn't match. When the judge read the verdict, it was not a cinematic slam of the gavel so much as a measured, inevitable accounting. The court found evidence of financial manipulation and document forgery. Restitution was ordered. Accounts were frozen. Certain assets were returned. It didn't erase the years I had given or unring the bell of humiliation, but it acknowledged the wrong in a way words alone never could. The law gave me back a sliver of what had been taken. More importantly, it stripped their story of its power. Outside the courthouse, the town looked different. People I'd once only nodded to sidewalked up to me and offered condolences and casseroles, yes, but also apologies for not seeing, for letting the performance go unchallenged. There were awkward hugs, and there were more honest conversations, neighbors, admitting they had suspected, but felt they had no right to interfere. The community had been complicit, not because of malice, but because small towns like to avoid scandal until it becomes undeniable. The boy, sweet and bewildered, was the center of the most tender and wrenching parts of this whole affair. The courts moved cautiously with him, placing him temporarily with a relative while custody issues were resolved. I visited as often as allowed. Those visits were not always easy. He would look at me with the familiarity of a child who knows who feeds him and tucks him in, and at times his confusion bled through. "Why are you crying?" he asked once, pressing a small hand to my cheek. I had to explain in words small enough for him and honest enough for me that grown-ups make mistakes and tell stories they shouldn't. I told him I loved him and that the love I had given would not be erased by paperwork or lies. As the game they'd played began to crack, I found myself asking something beyond legal restitution. Could I forgive? Could I reconcile? I discovered forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a long, deliberate process. I forgave myself first for the blind spots, for the years I allowed the performance. Then I forgave the child's biological mother in my heart in a way that disentangled hatred from justice. I forgave her for what she had done to me, but not absolved the harm. As for Robert, he received what the law gave him, and then in the quieter places of judgment became a man many in town chose to no longer trust. The moral of my story is simple, and I hope useful. Trust your instincts, but protect your life with documents and records. Love deeply, but keep a ledger of your own autonomy. Keep copies of important papers, know where your money goes, and don't be ashamed to ask questions, especially the ones that make you uncomfortable. And for those of you listening, even at an age when we're told to be thankful for what we have, Remember this, it's never too late to stand up for yourself. If my story resonates with you, take a moment to reflect, maybe talk to a friend or neighbor, check your own affairs, and don't hesitate to share this episode with someone who might need encouragement. If you'd like more stories like this, real-life accounts of resilience and recovery, please subscribe and join our small community. Your voice matters. Your story could be the light someone else needs.